where we're going is completely unsustainable.
Surveillance capitalism begins with the secret theft of private human experience, now declared as free raw material for translation into behavioral data.
Taken to its extreme, this process creates an enduring digital profile and lets companies know you better than you may know yourself.
What we are going to create is actually, some kind of Soviet Union.
And if we had thought about this in advance, if we'd sat down and really considered it, we could have stopped those things. But now it's almost too late, I think.
Science and technological advances have always inspired myths and stories, dreams and fears, happiness and anxiety in our society. That hasn't changed much throughout millennia, even though advances and discoveries have increased exponentially in speed and number. And nowadays, we are no different. The fast and unstoppable spread of robotics and AI into our societies still awakens the same curiosity and fears in us. We see how this technology implements and disrupts our lives, but at the same time, we have no idea how it works or what's happening behind the dark curtain of zeros and ones. Do we know the influence that they have over us? Do we know what they know? Or are we just captivated and scared at once by their possibilities, their illusions, and their power, so that we forget to ask those critical questions? Are we similar to those gullible citizens of Troy that, impressed by the mechanical horse, opened the doors of their city to mayhem and destruction? Are we ready to be conquered? Or have we already been defeated?
What we live in is a really important phenomenon where technology is getting increasingly persuasive. It knows way more about what will influence and get us addicted and hooked than we even realize about ourselves. That's why we check our phones like slot machines.
Our own information, from the everyday to the deeply personal, is being weaponized against us with military efficiency. Platforms and algorithms that promise to improve our lives can actually magnify our worst human tendencies.
Our worst human tendencies. They are ingested, processed, analyzed, and force-fed back to us in a dangerous loop orchestrated by giant tech corporations and executed like clockwork by computers and algorithms. There are countless examples of this at the tip of our fingers. The amount of data that those big companies have been amassing about us in the last decade is of enormous proportion, and just in recent years, we have started to realize the danger this poses.
What we have now is an asymmetry where, let's say, Facebook or YouTube have a huge amount of asymmetric data about what's going to cause you to stay on YouTube, or a huge amount of asymmetric information about what's going to perfectly manipulate your brain. We don't want to admit that's how it works, but it is.
So we can know who someone is, and we can guess what they'd be best at doing and what they might be likely to do. And we can guess all these things because we have more information about them, not only about the individual, but also about individuals like them.
You land on that YouTube video, you activate one of the most powerful supercomputers in the entire world, which is all of Google's computing infrastructure, and it calculates way better than you're able to calculate for yourself that it has the perfect next video to show you.
So just like you have like recommendations coming for, books or movies or games, anything that you might buy. So similarly, you can make other kinds of predictions. It's not just about what you might buy, it's about what you might do. So you can people can guess how to manipulate you.
Any asymmetry of power where, in the case of AI, is pointed at people's brains, and the AI can see way more moves ahead on the chessboard than your brain. I think that's the form of power that we need to be careful of.
And the power that is conferred by such knowledge will shape the politics of our time.
The implementation of automated AIs which oversee our lives 24/7 is not only shaping politics, but also many other fundamental aspects of human interaction. But as this fate seems closer than ever, the seeds of doubt are being sowed, triggering one decisive question among many. Where did it all go wrong?
We fell asleep about the internet. I was using the internet in 1982. We were all academics together using it. We never imagined it would be used for shopping. We never thought it would be used for porn. We never had any idea. And then suddenly in the 90s, late 90s, it suddenly goes whoosh and it's being used for all these things. And now it's creating a lot of problems.
Early on in the history of the internet, the people who started it, who included me, worshipped essentially two ideals at the same time. One of those ideals was a sort of a socialist feeling that everything should be free. But the other one was a kind of a capitalist or libertarian ideal that we loved our tech entrepreneurs like our Steve Jobs or Bill Gates. And the only way to combine those two ideals into one thing was the advertising model.
The advertising model. We all have experienced this. The annoying pop-up window jumping onto the screen and trying to convince you to buy a new jumper while reading an article about a polar bear. This advertising model has been redefining and improving itself by the day since the expansion of the internet into our homes in the mid-90s, catapulting it into one of the major revenue sources for online companies.
Everything appears to be free, everything is shared, everything appears to be open, but actually there's this huge business in the background. And what that did is it created a system in which anytime two people connect online, it's always financed by a third person who wants to manipulate the first two.
2 decades ago, we were all Alice, and we encountered the white rabbit. And just like Alice, we rushed after him into Wonderland.
Ah, Wonderland. The magical years of the early 2000s. While the world was being thrown apart by wars, destruction, and the chasing of terrorists hiding in caves, the high-tech companies in Silicon Valley were desperate to find a reliable solution to finally start making some money out of their free services.
We thought that these are great free services, while these companies were thinking these are great free raw material for our new operations of analysis, production, and sale.
And that notion that manipulation is built in, fundamentally distorts and perverts the entire enterprise. Everything is screwed up.
And if we had thought about this in advance, so we had sat down and really considered it, we could have stopped those things. But now it's almost too late, I think.
So how did all of this start? Who was the first to get their hands dirty? Well, Professor Shoshana Zuboff has been researching this notion for years. In her book, The Age of Surveillance Capitalism, the professor was able to point out the exact moment and place. At Google at the turn of the century. Founded in 1998 by Larry Page and Sergey Brin as a search engine, it rapidly became one of the most hyped companies in Silicon Valley. Despite this, the company struggled to find a way to create revenues from its exciting new technology in those first years. Regardless of the difficulties in generating profits, there was a unique idea in the original DNA of the company which had a powerful ethical connotation, a strong rejection of the advertising model. But the dot-com bubble of the early 2000s and the new world order after 9/11 changed it all. With added pressure from investors to become a reliable and profitable company, Google started to look for ways to make more money. To achieve this, it would focus on its growing supply of free data. The raw user data used until that moment to improve its search engine would now be engaged to target ads to users, betraying their customers and the initial idea of not using advertising as a revenue model, inaugurating the new era of surveillance capitalism.
Surveillance capitalism begins with the secret theft of private human experience, now declared as free raw material for translation into behavioral data.
Behavioral data. In simpler words, anything we do, look at, search for, or buy on the internet. Imagine having a private detective following you and tracking all of your moves, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Imagine this detective had the ability to store, analyze, and process the data produced by this continuous surveillance over your life in a matter of seconds. But where is this detective hidden?
Part of the reason we have more information is because it's become viable to gather that information. And so more and more people are building the sensors, and the prices come down in the sensors, so more and more people install the sensors everywhere. If you have a driverless car or any kind of car, they almost all have AI in them now. And so we can know when you tend to go places that way too, although the phone probably gives us better information. In fact, some people think the big boost in AI that happened recently is a consequence of smartphones. So now we just get so much information from every person because they're all carrying around something that's logging them all the time.
Our smartphones, tablets, cars, homes, TVs, computers, watches, emails, chats, support desks, apps, cameras, glasses, VR sets, and any other device that is connected to the internet is or can be the private detective that spies on our life, gathering information about us non-stop.
These flows of behavioral data are conveyed now through complex supply chains into a new kind of factory where the data are manufactured into products. But these now are specific kinds of computational products that are behavioral predictions, predictions of what we will do soon and later.
The desire to predict the future is an age-old quest of our species. This notion exists in many cultures throughout history and around the globe, in different forms, but with the same central idea: knowing what is to come in order to prevent, prepare, and perhaps even avoid it. But as a Machiavellian technological wonder, the new predictions that rush out of the recent data abundance are not meant for us to anticipate our future to prevent misery and misfortune, but to help big tech corporations grow their understanding of us, raw material and consumer at the same time.
These scraps of data, each one harmless enough on its own, are carefully assembled, synthesized, traded, and sold, taken to its extreme. This process creates an enduring digital profile and lets companies know you better than you may know yourself.
Imagine a priest in a confession booth who's like a fiduciary to helping you. But imagine this priest listened to 2 billion people's confessions. And they listened to your conversations outside the confession booth. And they knew everywhere you went. And they had a supercomputer, so when you walked in, they calculated confessions you were going to make that you didn't even know you were going to make. And their entire business model was to sell access to the confession booth so that someone else could manipulate you based on everything that was learned in the confession booth. That is Facebook.
The Book of Faces, the giant of social media, the creator and destroyer of trends. The company was founded by the then student Mark Zuckerberg in 2004. Since then, it grew to become one of the 5 most influential tech companies in the world. But unlike Google, Facebook focused on advertising as its primary source of revenue right from the start. Ad placements encompass more than 90% of the total revenues of Facebook, so it is not strange that they have perfected the art of data collecting and behavioral prediction. Nowadays, at Facebook's computational hubs, their AIs can ingest trillions of data points each day and produce 6 million behavioral predictions every second.
So these predictions are about us, but they're not for us. Where do they go? They're sold to business customers in a new kind of market that trades exclusively in human futures. Our futures, like we have markets that trade in wheat futures and pork belly futures and oil futures. We now have markets that trade in human futures.
These are the markets where futures are traded as if they were another commodity. What will we do later? Who will we meet? How will we feel? And what will we buy? In 2012, the magazine Nature reported on an experiment conducted by the social media giant during the 2010 US congressional elections. The research claims Facebook was able to push 300,000 people who previously had not considered going to vote to the polls. Another document published in 2014 by Facebook reveals that in a 7-day experiment run in January 2012, the company managed to manipulate the moods of almost 700,000 people by removing all the positive or all the negative posts from their newsfeed. And from these 2 experiments, the data engineers at Facebook learned 2 important lessons.
Number 1, we now know that we can manipulate subliminal cues and social comparison dynamics on Facebook pages to change real-world behavior and emotion. Number 2, we now know that we can do this while bypassing user awareness. It's undetectable. They never know that we're doing it.
Manipulating moods while bypassing user awareness is one of the magical elements of this new kind of digital surveillance that big techs have perfected in the last years. Now, this may sound more like the goal of an advertiser or an autocrat. Unfortunately, it is what has been seeping into our society and particularly into the political system all over the world in the last years. But how is this accomplished? Can they really change our minds?
It isn't that you really change people's minds about their basic political persuasion. It's much more often that you just change their minds about whether it's worth getting engaged this year, whether it's worth knocking on doors, whether it's worth going to the polls. And it's not about which party do you go to necessarily, but rather just, do you engage or do you stay home? Or do you get your friends to engage? Those kinds of things.
It seems that political interference through the AIs and algorithms that run social media platforms still has limited persuasive power. However, the discussion is still ongoing and the results are not yet conclusive. Different institutions worldwide are still studying cases like the US election and the Brexit referendum of 2016, or elections in countries like Argentina, Iran, Thailand, and Myanmar. The Cambridge Analytica scandal is one of the most infamous cases of political interference.
Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg is still testifying before a joint Senate committee hearing where he's facing a grilling on user privacy. Senators want to know how Cambridge Analytica, a data firm hired by the Trump campaign, obtained the data from as many as 87 million Facebook users for political targeting.
What we saw in 2016 and with Cambridge Analytica, and now again, there's people saying, is this really happening? What's going on? But Cambridge Analytica had been paid a lot of money, and not only it, but its parent company had been paid a lot of money for decades to help with political campaigns. And the specific things they were trying to do was to go out and find people that had similar opinions and then motivate them to do things that were in the interest of the government that was employing them.
The documents exposing the Cambridge Analytica scandal were leaked in March 2018 by Christopher Wiley to the British newspaper The Guardian. Wiley was research director from 2013 to 2014 at Cambridge Analytica, a political consulting firm. Those documents centered on alleged unauthorized possession of personal private data from up to 87 million Facebook users. After misappropriating the data, the company created personality profiles and influenced their behavior using targeted ads to stir different responses depending on who had hired them.
To be clear, the work of Cambridge Analytica is not equivalent to traditional marketing, as being claimed by some. Cambridge Analytica specialized in disinformation, spreading rumors, compromat, and propaganda. CA sought to identify mental and emotional vulnerabilities in certain subsets of the population and worked to exploit those vulnerabilities by targeting information designed to activate some of the worst characteristics in people, such as neuroticism, paranoia, and racial biases.
The Cambridge Analytica case functions as the tip of the iceberg of an endemic problem that has been eroding the foundations of the internet since the beginning. This advertising model, which has been taken to the extreme of micro-targeting and finally human behavioral manipulation, has become a massive problem for our society, especially in developing countries.
By taking advantage of countries with still developing civic institutions, the firm was a corrupting force in the world and became at the face of what colonialism looks like in the 21st century.
Digital colonialism via misinformation campaigns and behavioral manipulations in countries like Nigeria, Ghana, Kenya, Romania, and many others. However, the case of Cambridge Analytica is not yet completely closed. We will probably discover new information about it in the future. For us, the essential lesson is that we need to start protecting our information. Technology is becoming omnipresent, powerful, and fast in collecting and analyzing our data. And in a split society like ours, any slight change or disruption by any of those actors can change the future of a country or even a continent.
Some people tell me that you can't convince more than 2% of the population to change their vote using these kinds of social media attacks. And 2% is a lot. When you have a polarized society where there's a lot of 50-50 things, 2% is a lot. And all you need to do is find people that will take a social media message and that will either increase or decrease their probability of going to vote. That's all you need.
Exactly. That's all we need to change the course of history. And even if political interference is one of the scariest issues surrounding the use of AI and algorithms to collect and store data, other examples also make us doubtful of the future we are creating. One of those examples is the augmented reality game Pokemon Go.
It's called Niantic Labs, and that's where they incubated these new augmented reality games. When they brought it to the market, of course, they distanced themselves from Google. Niantic Labs became an independent little company and brought it to market that way, so no one would know that this came out of Google. In Pokemon Go, Niantic Labs had established its own human futures markets. So they had business customers, not online, but in real life, paying them not for guaranteed click-through, but for guaranteed footfall. People's real feet falling on the real floor of real places.
Manipulation at its best. Players are directed to a shopping center or store to follow the storyline of a game. Meanwhile, the device they use to play logs all of their movements. Is this the future we are really aiming for? Are we ready to become marionettes in the hands of shadows hiding behind algorithms and bits of data?
So these companies are not just tilting the social fabric in this direction, but it's creating real-world consequences that are eroding the fabric of society and eroding public and shared versions of truth. And we have to acknowledge that this is the fundamental force driving the direction of so much of these technology companies, is not just harvesting data, but the race to persuade the human mind and harvest human attention.
Human attention and the human mind. That's what big corporations and governments are fighting for now. Yet the time will come soon enough when they will start to gather more than that. As sensors are becoming cheaper, algorithms improve, and new technologies are established quickly in our homes and workplaces, the surveillance of devices over every minimal aspect of our lives will be something we will have to get accustomed to. And as soon as this surveillance will trespass into the boundaries of human biology, we will be faced with the dangers of a new technological dictatorship.
Other major danger we face is the rise of digital dictatorships that will monitor everyone all the time. A system that understands us better than we understand ourselves, can predict our feelings and decisions, can manipulate our feelings and decisions, and can ultimately make decisions for us. Now, in the past, many tyrants and governments wanted to do it, but nobody understood biology well enough, and nobody had enough computing power and data to hack millions of people. But soon, at least some corporations and governments will be able to systematically hack all the people. We humans should get used to the idea that we are no longer mysterious souls. We are now hackable animals.
Animals under the never-sleeping eyes of algorithms and censors. The old dream of autocrats and tyrants. An incredible power and dominion that we shouldn't let into the hands of any particular corporation or government.
So what we are going to create is actually some kind of Soviet Union.
What is this new power? It's not sending anybody to our homes at night to take us to the gulag or the camp. It's not threatening us with murder or terror. It is not totalitarian power.
Hitler and Stalin didn't want to have full power on people. The regime they wanted to create was not about having full control of people. It was to make people superfluous, just as pawns, as someone you can get out of the equation.
The tools and algorithms that one day may be used to create an autocratic society are still in their infancy. Even so, they are already creating a tremendous amount of problems: social inequality, misinformation, political manipulation, conflicts, neurosis, depression, and suicides.
Where we're going is completely unsustainable. If we keep going down the route of better and better micro-targeted, personally tuned manipulation and stronger supercomputers pointed at people's brains, taking over more parts of the fabric of life, whether that's relationships or dating or politics, that is going to debase the social fabric.
A society being torn apart by the misuse of technology, a dark future that nobody wants. So what's being done about it? Which solutions do we have?
Just like climate change, you have to show that no one wants this future. If people have holdouts in their minds and the engineers inside the companies believe, no, it's fine, we can make this work. That's the problem, because we can't make this work. We have to change the way we design the products and the business models. That's an uncomfortable truth.
The expected or normative future at this point is one in which the tech companies continue to exist approximately in the way that they do, and then other forces try to counterbalance them with regulation or maybe some sort of public pressure. That's very difficult. And the reason why is that since the nature of the new power concentration actually ruins public dialogue.
However complex the public dialogue between regulators and the private sector, there have already been attempts to protect users' privacy from tech companies. An example is the GDPR, approved by the European Parliament in 2016 and brought to life in 2018 under the late European Data Protection Supervisor Giovanni Buttarelli.
So to cultivate a sustainable digital ethics, we need to look objectively at how those technologies have affected people in good ways and bad. We need a critical understanding of the ethics informing decisions by companies, governments, regulators, whenever they develop and deploy new technology.
The GDPR was born precisely to do that. Protect users' privacy, create gatekeepers to oversee online processes, and observe surveillance capitalists.
One of the coolest things is that it showed that nations can cooperate without giving up their sovereignty, but just agree to cooperate on something. And if there's enough of them, if they're a big enough market, then people will do what they say.
There are other similar acts in American states like California and Virginia, and countries like Brazil, India, New Zealand, and Thailand. And in 2020, the EU started to work on a new Digital Service Act that is trying to improve and enhance the GDPR.
The information about a person is it's like having access to the physical body of the person. You can alter their behavior because you have that information. And so the European governments recognize that they need to defend the information sphere around their citizens, just like they need to defend their airspace. That it's part of their national security to do that.
Protecting our digital lives equally as rigorously as our national airspace would be a great slogan for a better future. But what about the giant high-tech companies? What should they do? Will regulating them be enough to avoid all of our fears for the future?
I think the right way to fix this is not so much to attack the companies, but to point out to the companies that what they're doing isn't even in their own interest.
From there, our point of view is you can redesign these technologies with a more honest and compassionate view of human nature, looking at a human being the way a magician would look at a human being, or the way a child developmental psychologist would look at a young developing teen. And you would say, we don't want to dose hundreds of millions of teenagers with social validation every 10 minutes. You don't do that.
I think what we really need to do is not only about digital technology, but we need to get on top of digital governance. But also there's a lot of work for the humanities to do. We need to refocus and understand ourselves better and find ways to engage people that make sense, so that people feel like their lives are worthwhile.
And instead of accepting a tragic destiny in which machines and algorithms are used to enslave us, we need to start imagining a world where technology is used to battle the big issues of our time, like climate change and social inequality. Rather than regressing to the dark years of the Middle Ages, society must build a better future. A bright and renascent period where technology empowers the discovery of new ideas, better lives, and above all, us humans.
How we can develop a positive relation with technologies which puts people, dignity at the center. This is about defining the values of the future, and we have to do it before it is too late.